I have a hammer, I'm building something. So we'll call this meeting of the Senate Finance Committee to order, and we'll hear House Bill 1339. And are you Representative Johnson?
Yes.
Come right up and introduce your bill and turn your microphone on.
Hi. Thank you all for hearing our bill today. My name is Representative Don Johnson. I represent Laconia. I'm here introducing House Bill 1339 and relative to the Winnipesaukee Basin and Replacement Fund. This bill came out of both House committees, unanimous and on consent both times. This bill, I had a fiscal note, but it really is an internal fiscal note for the Winnipesaukee Basin, so it doesn't affect any state funds or anything. It's all within internal. I'm actually going to turn it over to the chair of the Winnipesaukee Basin because he can explain it better than I can. He explained it to me, but he understands it much better than I do. And his name is Wes.
Okay, hold on.
Any questions?
Any questions for the representative? Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Wesley Anderson. I'm the chair of the Winnipesaukee River Basin Advisory Board. The board consists of the 10 municipalities and organizations that send sewage to the treatment plant in Franklin. The regional collection system, the treatment plant, is of course operated by Department of Environmental Services, and our main function is to review the capital improvement program, review the contracts to plan, design, and construct capital improvements that require approval by the governor and council, and to review the program's budget. The 10 members pay all the costs associated with the operations and maintenance of the system. The only state funds the program receives are from grants and loans that any sewage treatment plant can receive. There have been no major changes to the system's cost distribution plan since the 1980s when the system came alive. The board, its member communities, and the program administrator have been working for several years on changes to the funding model so that it more closely represents the current usage of the system by the members and the organizations. This is necessary as actual municipal growth rates do not align with the predictions in the 1980s. Water consumption changes due to more efficient fixtures and buildings, and maintenance of the municipality's own systems impact how much inflow and infiltration comes to it. The member communities are billed to support the cost of the 4 functions. The methods for updating the distribution costs for 3 of the 4 functions can be updated without any changes to the existing laws. The 4th, the replacement fund, can only be updated by the legislature. The replacement fund is the account the Department of Environmental Services uses to fund the cost of repairs of unanticipated failures that cost more than can be funded from the operations and maintenance account, yet are not costly enough that they need to be bonded. Presently, the cost of repairs funded through the replacement fund are distributed to member communities based on their use of a proportion of the system that failed. The impacted municipalities are required to pay back the fund, the cost of those repairs, over 10 years. The proposed change approved by the member communities will have the impacted communities paying 50% of the cost of the repairs, and 50% of the cost will be distributed to all 10 members based on their respective use of the total infrastructure. All other aspects of the existing law are unchanged except for some clarifying language regarding the proportional assessment of the fund that was identified by the Attorney General's office during their review of the draft legislation. The member communities ask for your support to change the existing law on the replacement fund, and thank you for considering our request.
So all of the members have bought into this?
Of the vote and its majority rules in the advisory board, 8 of the 10 voted for the changes, 2 did not.
And the reasons they did not?
One I know of, the other one I can surmise, and I don't want to give my opinion on that. The one I do know of, they're the closest to the Franklin treatment plant, so they have very little of the system upstream of it that they deal with.
And how do you apportion this? Gallons or?
No, in this case for the replacement fund, it's really how much flow that you have go through that piece of pipe. Okay. So I'll give you the best example. We had a force main fail on a line that takes 90% of Guilford's sewage treatment and about 10% of Laconia. So underneath the current system, Guilford pays for 90% of cost of the repairs to that system, and Laconia pays for 10%.
Lou.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks very much for your testimony. I was here when you got the original grant to build that system, when it was a 75-25 deal, 75% from the Fed. So how much major work has been done on that system since that was completed?
Quite a bit, actually. We're keeping it up so it meets current standards, as well as keeping it up from the standpoint of maintenance and repair. Matter of fact, we're presently looking at updating for the second time the computers that operate the system. So some repairs to the solid handling system for it. And we've got some loans that have come through Clean Water Revolving Trust and some ARPA money, so some energy efficiency improvements and some other actions.
Further question? So in essence, you've kept it up so that the functionality is good. Now, what about the assessment you make on the communities, the cost?
We recently updated, actually it's the first update since the 80s when it came live, on the operations and maintenance side. And over the last 5 years of flow analysis that we've done, in the last 3 years we've been working on how to take that flow analysis and change, what we pay based off of how much flow you're actually sending to the system. That was approved by the member communities late last summer. They all agreed to it, and it actually, the first iteration of 3, because of the significance of the changes, goes into effect on the 1st of July of this year.
So what percentage of the homes and businesses are connected to the system?
That varies from community to community. I can just talk about Laconia because I know that better. That's where I'm from.
Sure.
And that basically is about 50% of the city is connected to it. And it's really the urban core area up to, if you're familiar with it, some of the very large private developments north of Elm Street around the state school property. And then it does go up to Lakeside Avenue in that area. Most of the country aspects are still all septic tanks.
Do you maintain any kind of a sinking fund? Does the entity itself?
On the Winnipesaukee River Basin side,
Yes.
the replacement fund is actually kind of the sinking fund.
Okay, right.
But that has a limit to a certain dollar value. And what happens after that, if we have a major project, we bond it through the state system to pay the cost of repairs over time.
One further question, Mr. Chairman. But you said 8 of the 10 communities
Correct.
voted for it. And majority must rule in that case. Is that?
That's the procedures that have been
Yes.
established for years for the Winnipesaukee River Basin Advisory Board. Sometimes we change it based off a particular question and will require unanimous at this point. We didn't for this particular one.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Cindy?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have 2 questions, if I could. Is there any possibility that the fund could ever go into deficit based on needing a really expensive repair, but taking 10 years to repay that?
If it's very expensive, it really doesn't go to the replacement fund. It goes into the bond portion to it. The replacement fund is really for those unanticipated repairs that we had. In this case, the best example was that force main. It's a metal pipe. You really can't inspect the outside of it, and it happened to be in some very corrosive type soil that ate the pipe up from the outside. And we discovered the issue, when the leak happened. So we basically had to repair the pipe at that point.
But could it ever go into deficit?
The replacement fund theoretically could, but not the plant itself. Because what happens is, as it looks like we're going to have more costs in the future, then the assessment goes up for the various municipalities.
Okay. My second question is really for the LBA. On page 2 of the bill, lines 3 and 4, I have never seen a bracket in a piece of legislation before. So starting, you see that bracket, but reimbursement to the fund shall always be assessed back. I've never seen this.
I haven't either.
Before.
I'll ask
Okay. I think we'd want to get some clarification. I wonder why, what it means that it's drafted with this bracket. That's not even a parentheses.
What's the meaning of the bracket?
I don't know.
That's really an excellent question. Is it part of the bill or not?
I'd have to pull it up because that's the first time that question's come up.
It's page 2, lines 3 and 4.
I think you're talking about the bracket that goes around. Okay. That I can't answer. We basically drafted it. It went through the Attorney General office and whatever changes they made to it for, I'll say, legal piece, that's what we adopted, so.
I wonder if this was draft language and somehow it didn't get deleted when OLS actually drafted the bill? I don't know. Because it seems to be repeated in the bold comes afterwards. It's not exactly the same.
But it addresses your question about a deficit. You never go
Yeah.
into a deficit with this approach.
No, I'm still not understanding the possibility of a deficit. But thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your testimony. 2 questions. First, you said one community rejected this.
2 communities basically voted no.
Right, but do you know why the one that you said you're
Right.
familiar with did?
The second one was Tilton, and they never gave me an indication why.
And how about the other one?
The other one was Franklin, and Franklin is the last plant before the treatment, last system before the treatment plant.
So what was their objection?
That was just because they don't use the rest of the system. That was basically their objection. They shouldn't have to pay for,
Yeah, get it.
for the upstream communities' use.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So can you, let's just say you had $100, for argument's sake, expense. Can you differentiate how how the original law, would appropriate that, or the expense, or allocate it, I should say, and how this amendment would?
The simplest way, I'm going to use the Guilford and Laconia example again. Underneath the current law, 100% of the cost would be split between the 2 communities, Guilford and Laconia. 90% of that would go to Guilford, 10% would go to Laconia.
That's because 90% of the flowage comes from Guilford.
Comes from Guilford for this
Okay.
particular pipe. Underneath the proposal, what will happen is 50% of it will be divided off between Guilford and Laconia. Guilford will pay 90% of that 50%, and then Laconia will pay 10% of the 50%. The other 50% will be divided among the communities based off the total value they have of the infrastructure.
So that would, in a sense, assess a community downstream for repairs facilities they never use, correct?
Correct. But it would also split the cost for, I'll say, Franklin. They would pay for a portion upstream, but if it was just their portion on a piece that comes in, we would also pick up a cost of share of that. Because the way the system works, there are some communities who have Winnipesaukee River Basin lines that come to them, but the only they're the only ones who tie into that system at that point.
So if I follow up? So if a component fails at the bottom end of this thing before the treatment plant, let's just say Guilford's at the upstream end, do
Right.
they share in the cost of repairing that under the current system?
There's a little bit of difference for it. There's I'll talk the upstream system and the plant itself. And the plant itself is more complicated because each community bought a share of the plant. So when they do the calculations for who owns what, they also take into account how much of the plant that you purchased. Because the plant's approximately 12 million gallons per day. We only use about 6, but when we go to repair it, we're repairing it at the 12 million gallons per day capacity.
still haven't answered, I don't think, my question maybe is, again, if I am near the facility
Right,
and something breaks there,
correct.
does Guilford, let's say for argument's sake, way up at the upstream end of this thing, do they share in the cost of that downstream repair?
Yes, they do.
Under the current system, how much do they pay?
It would depend upon the total flow at that point from each community.
All right, under the new system, what would they pay?
It would be a percent of it based off the total flow of each community there. And then 50% is, well, in that particular case, 50% also gets distributed among everybody in the same method because
Whether or
everyone's
not,
using that
whether or
piece.
not they use that component. If that component's a valve upstream, they're still paying for it
Right.
downstream.
And
And
you
that
get
to me
that-
is concerning.
You get that one point, once you hit Franklin, that last piece, everybody's flow goes through it to the treatment plant. So it really depends upon where the break happens is how it's implemented.
Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you. Without objection, will be in executive session. I already did it. I didn't know we could do that. Yeah, I've always done it. Who cares? Are you doing it? Yeah. Yeah, but, yeah. Because if you didn't want to, you'd just say no. Right? That's why I always did it that way. Anybody can say no. I do the same thing at the consent end. So without objection, this goes on consent. All you gotta do is say no. Too late. Too late, you missed the cutoff.
Did you find anything out about the brackets?
Yes, the language inside the brackets should be stricken. Strike through when we get in the final.
That's better.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. That might be easy.
Senator Morrison.
I'm assuming you want a motion on House Bill 1339?
Are we going to motion on to amend that, or no, it's just a editorial?
I can make the motion for that after.
Strike that from the document.
One thing at a time, I just moved the bill.
Okay, we have a motion of ought to pass.
I would second that.
Okay. Discussion?
Well, I would make a motion that we strike for line 3 for page 2, where the bracket begins with the word but. Strike that line to the end of it on line 4 and leave with the word repair. Just eliminate that language.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and seconded to amend the bill. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Move on to pass as amended.
We have a motion and second by Senator Rosenbaum. Any discussion? Yes.
Yeah, I'm gonna oppose that motion, and I'm gonna do that based on the premise, from what I understood, that if we have a community that never uses a piece of equipment upstream, okay, they nonetheless get taxed, so to speak, for repairs to that. I have no problem with all the communities sharing a proportional share of the ultimate facility itself. But to ask a community that never uses a component in a system upstream to pay for repairs for something they never use, to me is problematic. And I'm not sure whether there's a remedy for that. But again, I would suspect that Tilton and Franklin, being the two that did not agree with this, that they're downstream and they're happy to pay for their own portion of that infrastructure, but not so much to pay for infrastructure that serves and is the responsibility of the community that's upstream. And so I think that there's probably a more equitable way to disperse these costs amongst the communities that are participants in the system. Again, no problem with everybody paying relative to the plant itself. But why should I in Tilton be paying for a pipeline that's up in Guilford? That would be my my objection. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, I think, with all due respect to Senator Gaida, his point is, I think it's well taken, but in this sense, you got into this together when it began, and you shared in this in order to get a better result for all of your communities, and I think that's what's happened. And as I said, I was around here when these grants took place, and the grant was for the Winnipesaukee Basin, for everybody involved. It was a fortune. I think the grant was a multi-million-dollar grant. 75% of it was taken by the federal government, 20% by the state, and 5% by all of the local communities.
Wow.
So you've all had a piece of the action for a long piece of time. This would disrupt that if we accept that. So I think, in keeping with the sentiment of the initial reason for the project, we should sustain that. I think this does sustain that, and everybody's in the game, and the game helps everybody. If you didn't repair that piece, it would hurt everybody.
They bought their share for 5%.
Yeah, they did.
Yep.
And they got a good piece for 5%.
So any alteration to this agreement calls for future legislation, not anything we can do.
Right, again, to the Senator from Manchester's remarks, the grant money is irrelevant to this, utterly irrelevant. This is about cost allocation going forward. The communities that originally agreed to the existing structure. And so we are changing that cost allocation, as he said, from its original form, which worked just fine. I'm not sure if is there a shortfall of funding, or is this just cost shifting from a community that doesn't use those features upstream to from the community that does have those upstream facilities to the downstream communities that don't. And I would suspect that's the case because Tilton and Franklin are both, as I understand it, at the bottom end of this. Why should they pay for improvements and repairs to a system they never use? Okay, they paid for their share, and they will continue to pay for their proportional share. But I can't support this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, heard Senator Gaida's objection. Cindy?
Well, I appreciate his concerns because I share them, but on the other hand, 80% of the communities that are participating have agreed to this, so they must think it's fair, and because I support the idea of local control, I am going to vote for it.
Any other discussion? For the motion, all those in favor? Aye. And any opposed?
Opposed.
And Senator Gaida is opposed. Okay, you got it. Yes. And the chairman's returned.
Okay, let's go to House Bill 1497.
Mr. Chair, I move ought to pass.
Senator Hennessy moves on to pass, as seconded by Senator Rosenwald. Discussion? Senator Gaida.
Very briefly, Mr. Chair, I'll be supporting this legislation. This is a problem that we know faced folks that didn't have the ability initially to select their options with respect to retirement. What this does, amongst other things, is it opens the ability to make their options at any point during their career. And so for that reason, because I think it is important to allow people that option, I'll be supporting this legislation.
Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you. We almost did this exact same thing last year with somewhat different language, but it's the same concept, and it seems fair to me.
It wasn't déjà vu all over again. Okay, any further discussion? There being none, all those in favor of the motion to
pass, say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Ayes have it, motion carries. And
We don't
can't, no consent, no consent, no consent.
We'll have that.
Someone like to take that one out? Okay, thank you. And I don't know that we had anyone designated to take out 1339. Senator D'Alessandro, thank you. Okay, next we go on to House Bill 1554. Senator Hennessy moves ought to pass.
Second.
Seconded by Senator Reagan. Discussion? This has to do with online payment of fees relating to the operation of off-highway recreational vehicles and snowmobiles. Looks like it was something that has been requested by the operators and probably should help out. So seeing no discussion, all those in favor of the motion of ought to pass, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, nay.
Without
Ayes.
objection, I'll take it out.
Very good. Senator Hennessy, would you take this out, please? Okay, thank you. House Bill 1583. Senator Rosenwald moves ought to pass on House Bill 1583, seconded by Senator D'Alessandro. This is relative to days of operation of state liquor stores. Discussion. Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you. I note that this is completely voluntary on the part of the employees, and would also note that while some of the days might be religious holidays for some religions and people, it's not a universal list, and it's not even everybody's Easter. If I were Greek Orthodox, it probably would mostly not be my Easter holiday, since they have to delay Easter until after Passover. So for that reason, those two reasons, I have moved ought to pass.
Okay, thank you. Further discussion. Senator Reagan.
So we set up a conflict between management and labor's representatives, and this is not it's not a wise process to engage in.
Further discussion. Senator Gaida.
I guess I would ask the question, what is the necessity of opening on a holiday for the purchase of something that you can be purchased the day before? Again,
An emergency.
right. So again, I'll be in opposition to the ought to pass on this.
Further discussion. I would bring your attention just to the note in the fiscal note. It says the commission indicates it's unknown if opening store on holidays would increase sales or simply shift sales from the days leading up to Thanksgiving Day and Christmas Day. And then the next bullet, the commission is unable to determine if additional sales revenue would offset the additional operating costs to open the stores. I would prefer to see something a little more definite in terms of revenue on this as opposed to taking the chance that we could be losing money. I mean, those are days that families tend to get together, and I think there are 362 other days that. What's that? That people can go shopping. So I will be voting against the ought to pass. Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor of the ought to pass motion on House Bill 1583, say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay? Nay. And the motion fails. Take an alternate motion.
Move ITL.
Second.
Senator Gaida moves inexpedient to legislate. That's seconded by Senator Reagan. Any further discussion? There being none, all those in favor of the ITL motion say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, the motion carries 5-2. I'll take it out. Yes. Okay, the next one is House Bill 1613.
Second.
Senator Hennessy moves ought to pass. That's seconded by Senator Gaida. Discussion. Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you. When I read this bill, I didn't really understand the need for it, because I've not heard from any of these manufacturers that they're gonna stop being licensed. So maybe it's a good idea, but I don't understand the need for it.
If I read this correctly, I think what they're doing is creating a separate category where it seems like now that any manufacturer of liquor with any number would pay $1,692 for a license. So they're splitting that off and say if you're a domestic liquor manufacturer of less than 1,000 cases, we're only going to charge you $300 for the license. So it's a savings to the business, and which is why you see an indeterminable decrease in the revenue over in the fiscal note.
Right, but
Further discussion. Senator Gaida.
I would support this so long as they don't sell it on Christmas, Thanksgiving, or Easter.
What's that? I don't know.
It's a private function.
If it's a private business, they can probably do what they want. Any further discussion? There being none, all those in favor of the ought to pass motion, say aye. 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 Opposed, nay.
nay.
The ayes have it, motion carries 6-1. And who would like to take that out? Senator Gaida. And finally, House Bill 1681.
Move ought to pass.
Second,
Senator Reagan moves ought to pass. That's seconded by Senator Rosenwald. And I think Senator Gaida, did you have a question?
Yeah, my one question, it's one I don't have an answer for, and I don't know if anyone here can help with that, is I think we had withheld support for this based on a residential sprinkler requirement or something that was pretty onerous in the National Building Code. And I'm told, but I haven't verified, that was removed as a condition of passage. That is a hugely onerous burden on new construction of residential real estate in the midst of a housing shortage. So I don't have an answer to that question. I was unable to get one in the short time between, that we discussed this. So that would be my only reservation here. And I think that we reserve the right, maybe Senator Reagan can help. He's on JELCAR amongst other things. We reserve the right to reject any part of the national code that is problematic for us as a state. Is that correct?
Before we adopt it. I remember when we removed that. I remember when we removed the residential sprinkler requirement.
Question.
Follow-up?
Follow-up question. Would this bill then negate that removal, or would it sustain it?
I would say that the 18 code is what it is. following Senator Reagan's comment, without sprinklers in it. So that's what the 18 code is now, what we have accepted. So by passing this, we would not be changing that 18 code.
Right.
All right. Let the record reflect that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Any further discussion? There being none, all those in favor of the ought to pass motion on House Bill 1681, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, nay. Ayes have it, motion carries. And Senator Reagan, would you take that one out?
Unless,
Wait, I'm
Oh.
sorry.
Without objection.
I don't object.
You object?
Okay.
I see we have a new trend starting. Okay, and yes, Senator Hennessy.
Would now be an appropriate time to ask questions of the LBA on the 2 remaining bills that we have in committee?
You may do that.
Yep.
Yeah, go ahead. I mean,
Okay. On House Bill 214, can you tell us about the Public School Infrastructure Fund? How long that's set up to be in place for and what the requirements of it are?
Honestly, I don't have a lot of information on Public Infrastructure Fund. There is a commission that, the governor originally set this fund up in a trailer bill a few years ago. And there's a commission that considers grants to schools. And beyond that part of the process, I'm not that familiar with it.
Could we get that information?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. And then on HB 536, I need an explanation why on page 3, we delete the workers' compensation offset. I couldn't find anything in the House blurbs on that, what that actually means.
But as I understand this, there's a death benefit in the retirement system. And with the existing language, if a person were to die in service, any amount received from workers' compensation would currently offset that retirement benefit. This eliminates that offset. So any workers' compensation benefit would not reduce the death benefit from the retirement system.
Senator Regatta?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you explain what that offset is, how that works?
So if someone were to die related to their job and workers' compensation would pay a claim, that would offset the retirement death benefit, which is typically paid out in annuity. So somehow that value would be applied to the death benefit. This would eliminate that, so the workers' comp benefit would be received as well as the retirement benefit.
Thank you.
A follow-up question.
Go to Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you. My question was about House Bill 214. We got a fiscal note by email that I don't understand, because it said there's $2.3 million in the fund, and that $1 million is going to be transferred in on July 1st, but that the total cost to the general fund is $3.3 million, and I don't understand if $2 million is already in there. Why are we looking at a $3.3 million general fund cost? Wasn't 2/3 of that already accounted for in a previous budget?
Well, the way I read it is the balance is 2.3, and through probably some other legislation of the trailer bill, there's another $1 million directed to the fund, and it jumps out coincidentally because the cost is 3.3, and with the million, the balance would be 3.3.
Right, but what I don't understand is why we're looking at a general fund cost of the whole amount when 2/3 of it is already accounted for. Why isn't it a general fund cost of $1 million or even zero if we've already? Well, I could see the $1 million because that was in the trailer bill, I guess.
Yeah, I'm reading this as the balance, the unexpended balance in the infrastructure fund is 2.3.
Let me see if I can try to rephrase my question. If we have to appropriate any money, it's $1 million. Because not the total 3.3, because 2.3 million is already accounted for.
Okay, I think I see your point. The total expenditures would be 3.3. And there wouldn't be any new appropriations if the balance is 2.3 and $1 million has already been committed.
Okay. Thank you.
It's just kind of changing the purpose of the money that's already there.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Hennessy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So going back to 536, I'm trying to understand why workers' compensation is even involved in this process. Because the way I read 21-I:29A, the death benefit for police officers or firefighters killed in the line of duty. That's not workers' compensation, right?
No, it's a bonus from the federal government.
We'll have to get clarification for you.
Thank you. I just didn't see, the House didn't mention anything in their
Right.
blurbs what this meant, so.
And I wasn't going back to the beginning and looking at the 21I, so I've got to read more into that, and then
Thank
maybe
you.
ask the retirement system for a little help on that too.
Yeah, for clarification, it might be helpful to know what the death benefit is to begin with.
Yep.
That way, you could give an example of, say, if a death benefit was $100,000 and $75,000 came out of workers' comp, then you know that there's $25,000. And I guess the other question I would add on, do we know how these policies are set up? I mean, what you're talking about with accidental death here, the same type policies that you can get for a bank for like $3 a month for $100,000 worth of benefit. Is that what we're talking about? And then if somebody dies, that the state gets that $100,000 and turns it into an annuity that's spread out over 10 or 20 years?
Now, the retirement system has a formula, and I believe it's a percent of your pay at the time the person dies. I just don't have whether it's 50% or 100%. That would be the retirement benefit.
Okay. All right, well, we'll let you do that.
Correct me, it's a $40,000. The benefit package for state employees, aren't they all covered for that as part of their benefit package? That's there.
There is an insurance for employees that's part of it. I'm not sure if it's 40, it might be 20 or something less.
There's another that's part of the package, their benefit package. So how would that affect this?
That's a separate insurance.
So they would get that regardless.
Yes.
This would then be a separate issue
This is more work-related. The insurance, the $20,000, if I fell out of a tree, my family would get the $20,000.
Would you also get your workman's comp?
Not if I was doing it on my own. If I was at work, then yes.
So. Okay, I have no other business for today. Those two bills that we had questions on that we'll still get some answers from, we'll take up probably next time. Senator Hennessy?
Without objection, move out of executive session.
Senator Hennessy. Senator Hennessy moves to come out of executive session. That's seconded by Senator D'Alessandro. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. And we will be adjourned without objection.
It's a process.
Two more, you're getting 4 off the FM report, and then you're getting